This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Friday morning means another episode of Play-by-Playcast. Thanks as always for the subscribe, the stream, the download, however you have found the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast that dives into the tips, tricks, process, experience, stories, and preparation of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. My name is Joel Godet. This pod is on social media at PXPcast, or I am on social media at Joel Godet, JoelGodett. You can email me as well, jgodett at BSU for Ball State University, jgodett at bsu.edu. With any comments, questions, concerns, observations, suggestions, love letters, and the like. We'll take it all. Our guest today is Chris Vosters, who is one of the big, I would say, up-and-coming broadcasters in the industry right now. Certainly one of the best under 30 broadcasters in the industry right now. Just left his job as the Great Lakes Loons broadcaster in the Class A Midwest League, and has ventured out into a full-time freelance, air quote, freelance. I mean, it's technically freelance, but he's got a ton of stuff coming his way. So, but he's working with Big Ten Network and NBCSports. He was involved in the Olympics in 2018, this year. Does some work with ESPN. A lot of Mid-American Conference football. He's doing Northern Illinois and Eastern Michigan coming up on Saturday. But Chris has his hands in a lot of different pots, is really good at what he does, and again is really young on the up-and-coming side of things. So somebody I wanted to have on because I wanted to hear his perspective, and it's a much different perspective than a lot of the folks we have on the podcast regularly. And as I sat down to record the introduction, something I wish I would have asked him about on the pod, but he tweeted it out just a couple of hours ago. We did the interview earlier in the day, so he hadn't tweeted this yet. But he said, one of my goals this baseball season was to talk to the manager every day for their pregame show. Wanted to deepen my knowledge of the team and the game. Their manager agreed to it. I became a better broadcaster for it. Not sure how many other managers would have done that, which is cool. And honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how many other managers would have done that. So kudos to the manager of the Great Lakes Loons this past year for allowing Chris Vosters that platform to learn and get better. And managers and coaches lie to pick their brains, but pregame interviews are a different story to do it every day, particularly at the minor league level. So kudos to his manager, and kudos to Chris for going out and doing that. And I think it speaks to kind of his dedication to become a better broadcaster in terms of being a better physical broadcaster, but also in terms of knowledge of the game and understanding of the game. And when you sharpen that side of what we do professionally, man, will you see a difference on air. So one other thing I wanted to point out about Chris before we dove into his conversation today that I think just paints a picture of how he approaches this industry and this craft that speaks really highly of him. And we'll do a whole bunch of other stuff along those lines in the interview, but wanted to point that out. If you want to follow him on Twitter, find that tweet and the rest. We always mention it at the end, but we'll mention it at the top. At CJ Vosters, Vosters, is the way to track down Chris Vosters on the Twitter machine. So with that being said, we dive into our conversation today, and we start at the very beginning. A very good place to start, as Maria would say in The Sound of Music. Why he got into sports broadcasting, why he likes sports broadcasting, what attracts him to this craft and this field. Chris Vosters joins us on episode 121 of PXPcast.
Well, I think it's just going back to when I was a little kid, something that I've always been drawn to for some reason or another. I always enjoyed sports, and I've always enjoyed I think in a broad term, public speaking. And so I think that play-by-play broadcasting was a great merger of those two interests of mine growing up. And I think that is what has ultimately driven me up to my career point thus far, and certainly hope that that's where what continues to motivate me going forward.
What'd you like about it? Like when you started, the first time you put on a headset, what was the drawing factor that was like, God, that was a really good time. I need to do that immediately again?
I think it was again just talking about something that I really, really enjoy, and that's watching sports. I think I just am someone that gets caught up in the pageantry and the scope of a sporting event. I like the characters involved. I like the atmosphere and the ambiance, and I like the multiple plot lines that come together and ultimately impact history in either a small or a great way. So I don't know. I think not without getting too far into what it means to have a vocation or a calling or anything like that. I mean, it's always just something that I've been drawn to, and I've felt that I've had a natural pull to this.
What took you to, and I don't we probably have too many conversations on this podcast for many people's likings about like what Syracuse was like when various guests were there. But what led you to Wisconsin and the kind of program that they have there, and what got you trained up in Madison to go out and do this in the real world?
I think the biggest thing, first and foremost, honestly, was the fact that I was an in-state kid. I grew up in Wisconsin, and I was going to college right when the economy was in a pretty bad spot, and there was a lot of concern about coming out of school with a liberal arts degree and not being able to find a job. And I mean, I looked really hard at Syracuse, to be honest with you. I thought long and hard about being part of the Newhouse Mafia, but I think the in-state tuition was huge about going to Wisconsin for me. And I did obviously spend some time on campus checking out some of the facilities. And while the School of Journalism and Mass Communication was great and proved to be just a great academic source for my education, what really sold me was the campus radio station at Wisconsin, WSUM. They had a brand new facility at the time, so it was well funded, and the sports department in particular was really making some strides in building a relationship with the school's athletic program, where they allowed us to broadcast a lot of the athletic events on campus. So there was a great opportunity for me to get reps and get practice and get involved with the practical side of the profession as well very early on. And I took advantage of that and had a lot of fun.
What's it like up in, and this is just like out of total curiosity because I don't know, like what's the program like at Wisconsin? Like kind of, what was your training ground like to get you set out once you were done?
So the way that it works, you've got the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and that is broken down into several different genres. You've got the traditional journalism route, which is more of the print media, and then the television reporting. And then you've got the strategic communication route that a lot of people get into as well, which is the marketing and public relations side of the journalism coin. And then you can also get into what's called the communication arts, the cinematic arts, the television and film production side of things too. So as far as broadcast journalism specifically goes as a niche, I mean, frankly, there was not a lot in the curriculum dedicated solely to broadcast journalism. And what courses they did offer through the School of Journalism and Mass Communication were more based in, again, like the television reporting side as opposed to strictly play-by-play. I think what helped me out was the fact that I went to school with a plan, knowing that I wanted to get into play-by-play broadcasting. And so I was able to seek out the opportunities outside of the classroom that help me achieve those goals. And again, specifically, and really more than anything else, it was being involved at the campus radio station with the sports department that they had, and the opportunities to really just figure yourself out, try and find your own voice, either hosting a radio show, which I did, and ultimately calling games as well for football, basketball, hockey, softball, volleyball. Those were really where, the opportunities that I really pursued to get me the outside the classroom experience that I think is so important going into a performance field like sports broadcasting. But that's not to downplay the education that I did get in the classroom. I really cherish the bread and butter journalism experience and education that I did get, because I think it taught me how to write, and I think it taught me how to think critically, and I think it taught me how to create an argument and craft an argument, and not just pick a side and defend it, but also be open to dissenting viewpoints as well.
Let's run with that. Why is that important in sports play-by-play, to be able to write and to be able to, argue something, not in like a bad way, but to be able to hold an on-air argument of sorts in a constructive way sometimes with an analyst and guide them down a path? And I don't know, does any of that translate? Is that stuff that you can kind of think back on and be like, man, that worked. I'm glad I had that correlation between what I studied and what I do back when I was in school.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that at the end of the day, we're in a communication field. And I think that to the point of writing, it's just another expression of communication. It's a lot more than just being able to talk. I mean, that's certainly one way to communicate, but there's also written communication and there's also nonverbal communication. And if you only care about one thing, then I think you're ultimately becoming a one-trick pony. And I don't know what a good analogy would be or a good comparison, but it's good to be diverse, and it's good to be versed in multiple things and not just specialize or focus in one discipline. I've got at this point in my career, an extensive background in minor league baseball. And when you talk about baseball players, you talk about the proverbial 5-tool player, the guy who hits for power, hits for average, plays defense, can throw, runs the bases well. And I think if you apply that to sports broadcasting, you don't want to just be good in one thing. You don't want to just hit for power, because you're going to strike out a ton and you're going to play bad defense and you're not really going to be a well-rounded player. So I think that's why it's important, and why I came to cherish being just I think a good journalist as a whole, being able to write. And I think also along those lines too, when you talk about not even having an argument, but just having a discussion with somebody on air. Again, working in baseball, there's lots of time to fill. And one of the goals that I have with just about every broadcast is to learn something new and hopefully learn something along with my audience at the same time. And I think that that's why it's good to have opinions, but also be open to people who see things differently than you, because I think that that's how that open-mindedness is how you ultimately learn something and become a more knowledgeable individual. And hopefully through self-improvement, we can all make the world a little bit of a better place.
Tell me about the diversity side of it a little bit too, because you have you had one of the sneaky best jobs in minor league baseball. And there's a couple of those in the Midwest League. Like Fort Wayne, you're doing TV every night, and Great Lakes, you're doing baseball and a bajillion other things beyond what we would consider kind of a normal minor league baseball job. What were you exposed to by being the voice of the Loons, and how good is that job?
Well, it was an excellent job. To put it succinctly, it was everything that I wanted it to be. And I still remember being at the winter meetings in San Diego in 2014 when the job was posted, and you're walking through the job seminar and you see all of the postings on just 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, thumbtacked to a bulletin board, basically. And that year in particular, there were actually some pretty good play-by-play jobs that were open. And I still remember walking up to and seeing that job description, the Loons description, for the first time and thinking like, man, this is what am I missing here? I mean, this is everything that I would possibly have ever wanted being a recent college graduate. Like, there's got to be a catch to being employed year round, being the lead voice of a minor league baseball team, and then getting to do high school basketball and high school football in the off season. And then that actually ended up leading to a pretty good Division II play-by-play basketball job that I had. So,
and like, weren't you the PD of a sports station too, as part of that, or like,
yes,
was there a talk show?
Yes. Like... I was the program director for an ESPN radio affiliate that happened to be owned by the same nonprofit group that owned the minor league baseball team. So the radio station was actually located, believe it or not, in the ballpark. So everything was packaged very neatly with a bow on top, to be honest with you. And I think, yeah, that it was the opportunity to just rinse and repeat and not go through the motions, but go through the process of preparing for different sports and coming across different individuals to help get me ready for games. And I think that when I said that the job was everything that I wanted it to be, a big part of the reason why is because the people that I worked for let me make the job everything that I wanted it to be. And so I wanted to create an environment for myself where it was being the voice of a minor league baseball team. I wanted to make it as every bit as close to being a major league broadcaster as I thought it was in my head. And along the lines too with covering high school football, you know, they gave me the freedom to set up my own conference calls with coaches during the week, just like I'm doing now with calling games on the Big Ten Network and ESPN Plus. And so I think that really, you said it, kind of one of the sneaky good jobs in the minors, and I would completely agree with that, because it just gave me some very fertile ground to experiment, try the things that I wanted to do. And, you know, I went into it with the mindset that, hey, I want to use this to really get my career up and running. And I was really given the freedom to do that.
What did you experiment with? Like, what did you grow on that fertile ground? How did you attack it? Just kind of take me through the development of you as a broadcaster at that stage and in that place.
Boy, it was, development is definitely the key word there. And I still think that the extent of what I learned will probably be a continuous process in terms of my understanding of what my time in Midland, Michigan really did for me. But, you know, I look back at the 4 years of baseball in particular, and I think the first 2 years in particular, I was really just not obsessed, but very, very focused with getting the mechanics of play-by-play right, and proving to everybody else as much as myself that I could be the guy for a 140 game season and call every double play well and nail every home run and just be a very, very good play-by-play broadcaster in that sense. And at the time when I was 23, 24, 25, that's what I thought a good play-by-play broadcaster was. And I think it gets back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier with being diverse and not having just a great voice or being able to call the in-game action well. Because one of the things that I learned over the course of my time with the Loons was being more human on a broadcast and allowing some of my personality to come out a little bit, and being more interactive with my broadcast partner and being more lighthearted and less robotic, and being able to tell stories better, and being able to not just humanize myself, but personalize the players and the coaches as well. So I think that's where I really learned, I think, and matured, honestly, would be the even better way to describe it in terms of my approach to calling a game. And I think that was the real benefit of being in an atmosphere and an environment where I called 140 games for 4 straight years. It really just allowed me the repetition to just do it day in and day out and get better at it in a pretty quick window, relatively speaking.
What's the secret to telling a good story, too, when you talk about developing that ability and working on it? And I'm sure it's different from sport to sport, but what's important when you highlight, all right, I'm going to say X, Y, and Z about a person? How do you organize what's most important, the best way to deliver it, how to weave it, where to place it? Kind of take me on the process of how you attacked getting better at that.
I think it was just getting a better feel for the flow of the game. And honestly, because in the beginning I would I would go as far as to like basically script a story that I wanted to tell in a broadcast. I mean, I would write down bullet points in my scorebook, and I would arrange them in the order of what I thought was most important. And I was, again, just very methodical and robotic about it. And I guess I learned to perhaps counterintuitively strip a lot of that back as, again, I just learned with repetition to be more in tune with the flow of the game and just spend time getting to know the players. And I think instead of just trying to memorize and recite, genuinely try and absorb information that I got in the clubhouse or at batting practice, or perhaps even reading an article somewhere. And I think just doing it more naturally helped me anyway. And it could be completely different for other people, but it almost like developed that sort of inner clock that when the moment was right during the game and maybe even during the at bat, that it was the appropriate time, I think, to expound on a particular story. And I think, again, it's being flexible. It's not trying to cram a story in at all costs. If you say, okay, I'm going to work this story in the 5th inning, no matter what's going on, then I think you're closing yourself off to really following the unfolding story of the game, which should be more important. And I think, again, when you just try and, I guess, absorb information more organically, I think, as opposed to with a regimented process or goal in mind, then you're able to perhaps drop a nugget on player X, and the at bats going on maybe a little bit longer than I thought it would. Well, I can expand on this discussion that I had with him at batting practice today, and then boom, suddenly he's on base, and you can maybe you're in a pretty good rhythm or on a pretty good roll at that point, and you can talk about what you learned about his family or his college career or something like that. I mean, that's a very I guess ham-handed example, but
no, I mean, it's like it's easier to talk about a person as opposed to reciting a story they told you, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I think that was one of the big things that I really learned, just that timing and I'm still learning, absolutely 100%, to not, and maybe it's an ego thing too, to not just try and say, okay, I'm going to impress everybody with this story that I learned and am going to tell. I think it's just being able to get a sense for the moment and when it's right to work something like that in, and know that, hey, you might have a great story that you end up sitting on for the entire broadcast and just never work in. I think that is, there's a humility in that. too, that I think I'm continuing to develop also.
You know, one of the things about you too is that you've figured this out, I guess, all very, very young, and have had a lot of success early in your career. So I'm curious from the standpoint of how you attacked that, how you grew, what your feedback system was. You know, what did you hear, and kind of who did you reach out to say, like, you know, how can I get better? Where am I going? And make those steps as quickly as you did. And obviously part of that is on, you know, you at some point, you know, like the person is just talented and can take advice and run with it. But like, how did you attack who you were going to reach out to and handling advice and putting it into practice and all of those things?
Well, I think part of it really had to do with the job that I had for 4 years in Michigan. It was a year-round job. And I mean, you know, as well as anyone, that the sports calendar is 24/7, 365 days a year. And so, I mean, I went from a full 5 months of minor league baseball right into a high school football season. And then from there right into a pretty extensive basketball season as well. So I was always just coming into contact with people, and I think that as much as anything was kind of the spur to keep me in a constant state of self-evaluation and self-critique of my own work, which is really important. And then, you know, as I learned, I guess it was kind of an evolving process as well, when I would listen to myself and hear things and think, man, am I doing this right? Or am I getting my point across here? I would ultimately ask somebody for their feedback or their opinion. And then they would ultimately say, hey, I think you're doing a good job of this, but why don't you work on this? And so it started the process all over again of, okay, I'm going to try something new in this broadcast, and I'll, try it out for a broadcast or 5 or 7, and I'm going to send it to somebody else and say, hey, I've been working on this. What do you think? And I would never limit myself to the kind of people that I reached out to as well. I mean, there are lots of other young broadcasters that I would consider peers that I reached out to for feedback. And there were also people that I would consider mentors as play-by-play broadcasters that I reached out to too, people that are ahead of me on the career path and perhaps in a position that I want to be someday. And then I would also reach out to people outside of the industry. I mean, like friends some of the time, like some of my good college buddies. Occasionally I would just ask, hey, what do you think of this? Do I sound like myself? Yeah.
That's a good question too, actually.
I think producers and directors and people that are on the back end of broadcasts are really, really important to be in communication with as well, because I think that they have really just a critical eye and ear for the overall projection of a broadcast. And I think you can get some great information from them as well. But I'll also say, at the risk of rambling on a little bit, that, it's tough, because I think part of the reason why I'm at this current stage in my career is because I've shut down some channels and areas of my life that perhaps, would make it seem that I don't have a lot of balance. I mean, it's because I really, really love what I do, but, there were lots of working nights and weekends. I mean, you pass up a lot of social opportunities. I mean, I'm still single, which, is fine, but I see a lot of my friends and peers, both in and out of the industry now, starting to.
I'm just going to tell you that that's a good thing, because that's what everyone tells me. So I'm just going to pass the advice down there on that one. I don't know what it means, but it's just that's a good thing.
Well, thank you. I get, but hey, but look, I mean, I've had to, you always, there's an opportunity cost to everything, I guess. And, so I've pushed myself career-wise, is what I'm trying to say, at the expense of some other areas in my life as well. And so, I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. It's just the choice that I have made, and that's what I'm living with.
When did you first decide, like, you know what, I feel like I'm good enough to contact an agent and kind of go that route and say, like, I feel like I'm good enough that someone that I want someone to represent me and have that going forward? And what's that process like? Because I imagine they say yes and no and give you feedback, etc.
Yeah, well, and to be perfectly honest, I mean, I didn't reach a point where I thought that I was good enough to court an agency or even a specific agent. It was really serendipity, to be honest with you. I was kind of going through my regular routine of just sending my stuff out, and someone that I reached out to just passed along my tape that I had sent to his agency, and they contacted me from there, and we started a conversation and talked for the better part of a couple of months, and ultimately decided to start a business relationship together. But I was at a point where I was certainly not actively looking for an agent, and to be honest with you, didn't really know a whole lot about that side of the business. What I did know is that, hey, when you're ready to have an agent, they'll reach out to you and they will let you know that you're ready. And I really didn't spend a whole lot of time dwelling on that. I kind of just took it at face value and filed it away and was like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and maybe a couple of career steps down the road, I'll be ready to embark on that journey. And it happened really out of the blue and sooner than I expected. And part of it too is the DNA of the agency with whom I signed. It's not a major IMG CAA type group. They specialize really in finding young broadcasters and developing their careers as much as anything else. And so it was really right place, right time, right fit in a lot of ways that just made it work for everybody involved.
We get a lot of questions from people that listen about that type of thing as well. And I'm just kind of curious how does that relationship work as well from your perspective in terms of what kind of feedback did you start to get from them? And then maybe how does your career start to change a little bit once you have that person working with you?
I think that it's really like everything else in the industry, Joel. I mean, there's just not a prescribed path or a set route that people take. So I think extending that to a relationship with an agent, you have to have the kind of relationship that you think fits your personality and that of your agent and agency. So some guys just need someone to bang out the legalese of a contract. And for me, what I was really looking for, and I think didn't even realize at the time, to be honest, was just someone who could manage my career, not so that I didn't have to, but if I had a question on, hey, is this a good clip for a reel? Or, hey, what do you think of how my resume looks, or something like that? How do you think my personal website looks? Having somebody to turn to for advice in those situations has been, I think, the greatest benefit of being in a relationship with an agent and an agency. And I think that, there are perhaps the most obvious benefit, and I think the one that everybody craves, is that they have the connections in the industry that we are all trying to develop ourselves. And so they can get you into a room with a coordinating producer at a network, and basically like the blue check brigade, it's like you kind of come in with like a verification that, this guy is.
It's like broadcaster. It's like broadcaster Shark Tank. It's like, I just need the person to set up the meeting for. You know what I mean? Like, they always come in. It's like, I need the person to contact Toys R Us to get my toy in the store.
Yes. Yes. There's just, we're all in the soup, and they just add, I guess, a little bit of oil or something like that to make you rise to the top. And, I think that also the misconception is that when you get an agent, you just kind of sit back, put your feet up, and wait for the phone to ring. And that was not my mentality. That was not my approach at all. And if anything, I think having an agent has made me work harder, because I know that there's somebody on the back end trying to enhance my career, and I want to make sure that I'm pulling my weight in this relationship. And it is up to you, the broadcaster, in a lot of ways. Like, if you get into the room with somebody, then there's nothing your agent does for you from there. I mean, you've got to sell yourself and back up, I think, the voucher that you've been given. And I think that in some ways that puts a little bit more pressure on you when you go into an environment like that. So, I think that, again, for everybody, though, it's not, having an agent is not, I think if you think that getting an agent is going to be what makes or breaks your career, again, I think you're looking in the wrong place. I think that, it will happen at the right time for everybody. And there are lots of people out there that have outstanding careers without ever needing an agent, and more power to them.
Let's backtrack a little bit, even before you got to that point. When did you make the transition from radio into a little bit more television work? And what was that transition like for you?
Well, that was one of the sneaky benefits, actually, of going to the University of Wisconsin as a Big Ten school.
Do you have Student U?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, you know what that's like, man. I mean, it was great to have that opportunity to really get some solid, well-produced television reps before I even graduated. And that was a big, that was definitely something valued by the Big Ten Network on this end of the equation, when as a professional, I could say, hey, I went to a Big Ten school, and I'm not only a Big Ten alumnus, but an alumnus of your program too. I think that they really valued that in particular with me personally. And so when I took this job here with the Loons and ESPN 100.9 FM, there were so many great things about the job, as we've discussed, but I was always looking at other people, who are either ahead of me or maybe at a similar stage in my career path, and was trying to think like, okay, well, what do other people have, or what are other people getting that my situation currently doesn't provide? And I would try and then seek out those opportunities and just make something out of my current situation. And so that was one thing that I realized, like, hey, I'm getting a ton of radio reps here. This is great and wonderful, but I would love to squeeze in some television reps just to continue to develop that side of my skill set as well. And so really whatever I could get my hands on. I mean, even if it was like a webcast, one camera shot in the beginning, to me, that was better than nothing. That was at least something that I could put on a tape, and a video tape, so to speak, and send out. There were some opportunities for me here with just a local public access television channel. I mean, they would come and do 1 or 2 Loons games a year, and I asked if I could be the play-by-play guy on those broadcasts. And the Loons, from a radio standpoint, were always so gracious and accommodating with allowing me to pursue those endeavors that didn't benefit them at all, but they knew that it's what I wanted to do to develop my career. And, that led to a couple of opportunities calling high school sports in the area on the local community television station, being close to Central Michigan. And I think a mutual friend in Adam Jacksa, he was always so great about calling me up whenever he was missing an ESPN3 broadcast and just giving me some opportunities to tinker with a television call on, again, another very highly produced telecast. So I think it was just making it's all about making the most of whatever situation you're in and trying to squeeze the sponge as best you can. I mean, there are always opportunities out there, I think, if you dig hard enough to find them.
When was the first time you called figure skating, though?
The first time that I called figure skating was the Four Continents Championships about 2 weeks before the Olympics. And
was that through the Olympics, though?
Say that again.
Was that through the Olympics?
It was. It
Okay.
was through the Olympics, and I
you started talking, and I was like, you did not have a figure skating broadcasting background. I was like, come on.
That's true. Well, and I don't know. I mean, this is totally speculative, but they originally called and asked if I wanted to do Olympic figure skating on their 4K feed for the Olympics, of course, and I said yes, and was very, very excited. And then a couple of weeks passed, and I don't know if they said to themselves, hey, this guy has never done figure skating before, and we're about to throw him into an Olympic environment here. Maybe we should give him like a figure skating competition before the Olympics just to get his feet wet. I don't know if that was actually their thought process, but I'm glad that that's how things turned out, because I was able to do, again, what's called the Four Continents Championships, which is kind of like a miniature world championship event that is held every year. But in this case, 2018, it was the last major figure skating competition before the Olympics. And so I was able to do that. And again, somewhat ironically, I ended up getting more exposure on those broadcasts because those broadcasts were repackaged and aired on NBCSN than I did for the Olympic broadcast, because I was not Terry Gannon and Johnny Weir and Tara Lipinski. I was doing the same events, but for the 4K ultra high definition feed. So that was a whirlwind. I mean, I was more excited, I think, than being particularly nervous. But yeah, the adrenaline was definitely going into my first call of figure skating.
What's it like? How does one broadcast figure skating?
For me personally, it was like.
Yeah.
For me personally, it was just like going back to college. And again, I think one of the reasons why I like being a play-by-play broadcaster is because of the preparation and the learning and the studying that goes into the broadcast before it even happens. So I'm a naturally inquisitive guy. I like learning new things. And NBC, after I gave them the thumbs up, they sent me a 300-page packet of figure skating 101, and it was the history of the sport, it was the judging and the rules and the critiquing of the sport. It detailed the fundamentals and the mechanics of figure skating, the different jumps.
Wow.
And so it was just like going back to school. I sat down with that thing and I read it cover to cover and just totally immersed myself in it, treated it like an online class, and then the broadcast was the test. And I think it's also important too to not put too much pressure on yourself and try and do too much. My broadcast partner for the Olympics was and is, I guess, an Olympic gold medalist, and that's who people want to hear from, not me. And so I just needed to be there to just nudge the broadcast along, mechanically do things, and like getting us in and out of break, and just make sure that I didn't say anything too stupid. And I think, again, I was able to rely on my preparation to not sound like I was a total figure skating novice. I made some mistakes, absolutely, but was willing to roll with the punches, and ultimately at the end of the day was very driven to get better. And I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, I loved learning the sport. I totally got caught up in the spirit of the games, and I would love to do it again. So I think, having that kind of mentality for anyone out there who's calling a sport that they're not familiar with or anything like that, just do your homework. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Get through the broadcast, and again, with time and practice and patience, you can absolutely get better. And I think if you go into it you're just trying to have fun, I think that is also a really important part of attacking an assignment like that.
Well, that's where storytelling comes in too, right? Because NBC, particularly with the Olympics, is really big on backgrounds and storytelling. So, I mean, if we go back to where we kind of started with this, the ability to weave in, the ability to learn something and learn something with your audience is big in a situation like that, no?
100%, absolutely. And I mean, with an event like the Olympics, you don't have to look for stories. I mean, the stories come to you. And again, it's really not like, NBC in particular puts an emphasis on storytelling. That's kind of like how they try and distinguish their broadcasts, I think, from other networks. And so that was great to have that sort of encouragement to really focus and work on that side of broadcasting, the storytelling. And it was good to, again, practice kind of getting the inner timing. I don't know if like it's an inner clock necessarily, but just learning when the good moments and opportunities were to work those stories in, and also knowing when to lay out and know that, hey, the story is being told on the screen with the reactions of the athletes and the people in the stands, and knowing when you don't have to say anything and you can let the moment just speak for itself.
Last thing I want to ask you about, Chris, is just your overall demeanor on the air too, and just the way that you broadcast. And you've kind of alluded to it a couple different times in some of your recent answers, but just overall smoothness. You've got a very calming, listenable, I think is probably the word, tone that kind of just rolls with the way that you talk and when you watch stuff you've done, the way you broadcast. Can you describe a little bit kind of what your approach is, what your persona, your personality is on the air, and how you developed that particular timber, so to speak?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the compliment. I really appreciate it. And I will say that it's still very much a work in progress for me, and is something that I think that we all are continuing to learn and discover as our broadcasting careers continue and evolve. And I think that, again, early in my career, I was very, very focused, to put it perhaps lightly, on just proving to everybody that I could be on the air as a young guy. I almost wanted to overcompensate for my youth and just to come across as an authority figure, a guy who knew what he was talking about and could handle the big moments. And I think that I ended up losing a lot of my personality in those calls. And it just kind of dawned on me one day when I was home for Christmas, and I was visiting with some good high school and college friends that I hadn't seen for the better part of a year because of my schedule in minor league baseball. And I was just thinking, like, man, this is not the way I'm behaving with my buddies around, is not how I am when I'm on a broadcast. And I mean, how are people going to like me or get to know me if I just completely close off my personality on a broadcast? And I think part of it too, when I was just starting out, I never wanted the broadcast to be about me, and always wanted it to be about the game and let the moment tell the story and not insert any of myself into it, because it would detract from what was really important, and that was the game. And I think I just maybe took it a little too far and was just a little too austere in my presentation. And so learning to just relax a little bit and be less of a perfectionist and just kind of roll with the punches a little bit ultimately allowed more of my natural self to to come into my broadcast, which I think in turn makes me more relatable to the audience. And I think I started to care more about the relationships that a broadcaster can have with an audience too. Responding to emails and tweets and things like that, and sort of building my brand that way as much as anything else. And it was listening to the guys that are at the top of the totem pole too. I mean, the Al Michaels and the Joe Bucks of the world. I think part of what makes them so good is that it just sounds like they're having a conversation with their friend as they're watching a game. And I think that was something that was sorely lacking in my broadcasts, and I think is something that I still have a ways to go to really continue to cultivate and develop. But I think that just learning that, I think, and bringing more of myself into my broadcasts, I think is really where I want to continue to grow going forward.
Chris, how do people find you? I guess on air, and how do they find you on social media too?
Well, I'm unfortunately I'm a little harder to track down now. Now that I don't have the fantastic backing of being in one place with the Loons and 100.9 FM. I'm embarking on a freelance career for now, and hoping that opportunities continue to grow, and we'll see where the path takes me from here. But
which is both like scary and exciting all at the same time, is it not?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's definitely pushing the envelope. I'm betting on myself, whatever cliche you want to slap on it. But I think that in the long run, this is, what's going to be best for me. And now I can just say that I tried it. And if I fall flat on my face, well, maybe there's another minor league team out there that will take me back. But I would say the best way to reach me is on Twitter or Instagram. My handle is at CJ Vosters, my last name, V as in Victor, Osters. And I do have a personal website. It's just www.chrisvosters.com. And on the front page, I've got a calendar widget that I populate with my upcoming broadcasts. So right now I'm doing a little bit on the Big Ten Network. I'm doing a lot of MAC games, as a matter of fact, on ESPN Plus. So that's kind of what's tying me over for now. And, we'll see what else comes up from here.
All right, many thanks to Chris Vosters for joining us on the pod this week. And I know there are a lot of younger listeners on this podcast that are in the college age or just out of college age. And again, as I said off the top, one of the reasons I wanted to have Chris on was the perspective that he has, being just a couple of years, more than just a couple of years, but a handful of years out of school, and the early success that he's had, how he's approached that from a professional standpoint, but also from a craft standpoint, how he's become as good as he is, as quickly as he has, because he is very good, and he's done it very quickly, and then how he has kind of risen through the ranks in this industry as well. I thought it was interesting to hear some of those perspectives, and hopefully some of the listeners out there enjoyed his views and his experiences on all of those notes as well. So my appreciation to Chris for coming on here and lending us a good 45 minutes to an hour of his week this week. Again, at CJ Vosters, as he said, is the way to find him on Twitter. If you want to hit him up on social media, let him know you heard him on the podcast and you liked what he had to say. And we'll be back here next week with another episode of PXPcast. Until then, my name is Joel Gaudette. The music is by Marshmello, but as always, he doesn't know it, so don't tell him. And we're out.
We'll be right back.